I'm OG Anunoby of the Toronto Raptors, and you're listening to the Double Clutch Podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the Double Clutch Podcast. I'm one of your usual hosts, Mike Miller, and once again I am joined by the man known as Coach Huw. It's Huw Hopkins.
Hello, Mike. Actually, before we start, I have a question. You work in banking, right? So
Oh, God.
you must be familiar with the sort of sell high and buy low sort of idea. Is
Right.
now a good time to invest in the big baller brand? I think they've got a great future, you know?
I'm going to go under the guise of this is not advice, because I don't want you to take me to the Financial Ombudsman Service or the FCA or anything like that, which is a really interesting start for this pod. And if I'm going to let my personal preferences come into this, there was never a time you should have invested in the big baller brand. Oh God, I thought we were going to get away with not mentioning it. Actually, I was like, at least we don't have to cover that topic this week. Yeah, but for those of you that don't know, Lonzo has stripped all reference to BBB from his Instagram and social media accounts. Put a picture of him as a toddler wearing a Nike tee. And it's all to do with one of LeVar's business partners, apparently. I don't know if embezzling is the right word in this situation, but certainly there has been $1.5 million disappear somewhere.
Let's avoid the legal terms, shall we? In case we do get called back on them.
But apparently the guy had a history of financial crime as well, so, you know, that's always a good start.
Allegedly.
No, I thought he was convicted.
I'm not getting into this. This is all your work.
Well, we'll consult the DC lawyers. But yeah, okay, hijack the show right from the start. Cheers, you. Brilliant. How you doing?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Well, I mean, I'm okay because of, just a few hours before we started recording, of course, we had the sort of a bit of a punch in the nuts. I guess we don't really know what's going on entirely with NBA London just yet, but we have seen pictures, and more is going to come out tomorrow, so I imagine people listening to this will probably know what's going on. But yeah, the NBA, or certainly a sports website in Paris, released a bunch of pictures with an NBA bus at important locations in Paris, which and it sort of says coming soon in January 2020. So it certainly looks like our days of NBA London are over, Mike.
Yeah, I got to admit that was what did you call it? A nut punch?
Yeah,
yeah. That's the perfect description for it. I mean, we kind of knew it was on the cards.
Yeah.
As much as anyone can know that a nut punch is on the card. What a great start to the show. Yeah, it's terrible news. I mean, you were at NBA London this year with Josh Coyne, and Adam, good friend of the show, Adam, spoke on the potential for it to go to Paris in 2020, and it seems that that's the way things are going. So there's been a couple of releases on French websites. You mentioned the bus. There's also huge banners outside a town or city hall, the City Hall of Paris, actually. So yeah, city, not a town, is it? I'm gutted.
Yeah.
To as a UK fan, that the game is being taken from us. If it is, I mean, there's no official word yet. There probably will be by the time this comes out, and we've already reached out to the NBA UK office for comment, as to what this means for London, because who knows? Maybe there'll be 2 games. Complete speculation at this stage, but I can live and hope, and I'm not going to accept NBA London's dead until I've seen the body, essentially.
Yeah. Well, it looks like they're wheeling in a coffin. So I mean, it's really disappointing in some ways. I know what you mean. Like we're speaking now, and probably people will know by the time this is out. But some ideas we were kicking around even when we were at NBA London earlier this year, and certainly since we've spoken about it on Slack, they could sort of do a home and away game, because one of the frustrating things I think for teams must be the fact that they lose a home game, because one team has to be a home team, one team has to be an away team. So if you are taking 2 teams away, one of them has to be the de facto home team in London. But of course, you've got none of your own fans, none of your there's no sort of encouragement for you to be there, and it makes it that much tougher. And if you're teetering on the edge of a playoff position, then I imagine you'd be kind of gutted that you didn't have that home game, because a home crowd is so much better in those situations. So who knows? We may see two teams come over. Let's say Golden State Warriors and Los Angeles Lakers. We could see Golden State Warriors have the home game in London, and then the Lakers have the home game in Paris. But why I'm going into this much detail, I don't know, because
I don't either, because now people are going to be expecting the Golden State Warriors to come next year, and the likelihood, based on past performance, is that it's more likely to be
the Atlanta Hawks.
Yeah, the Atlanta Hawks will be hosting, let's say, the Charlotte Hornets, or something like that.
Yeah. Well, anyway, we don't know the full story yet, but I sort of wrote a lengthy piece a week or two after NBA London, sort of talking about its long-term, its long-term capabilities or potential in the UK. And I think I was sort of, coming to the conclusion that, London's still going to be a market for the NBA, but maybe they'll send over WNBA teams. Maybe they'll do stuff in the summer months, with one or two ambassadors or something like that. I don't think they're gonna just pack up everything that they've quote unquote built in London in the past 9-10 years. I don't think they're going to abandon the marketplace entirely, but certainly the regular season game for 2020 doesn't look like it's on the cards as we speak. But
yeah, and Silver was quite open and honest. You mentioned obviously being there. I've got your article in front of me. It was a prominent subject at NBA Commissioner Adam Silver's press conference prior to the London game, when 8 of the 12 questions he was asked referenced the annual European regular season game being played elsewhere. He said, quote, "It is possible. It is something we're looking at very closely, and put my teeth back in. We're looking at very closely, and that is playing a regular season game in Paris for next season." So they haven't hidden this. No. It's something that they've been quite upfront about. We've had it for 9 years, the regular season game. It's sold out for 9 years straight. Every year it comes over. As much as we love the fact it's coming, there is always so much noise about people complaining that they can't get tickets.
Yeah.
So now it's going to be the complaining that they can't get over to France or whatever, which, we just like to moan. We're British.
Yeah.
That's part of our national history. For me, I'm a little bit torn because although it's quite easy for me to get to London, I think I might actually be closer on the train to Paris, where I'm based. So, c'est la vie.
I could just imagine you donning a beret now, Mike, and
I'm slowly putting on my long sleeves blue and white hoops t-shirt, my beret. I'm shaving off my beard and putting in the moustache. I've got my garlic cloves all ready to go, and I have a baguette ready as well. So I'm going full French for this. But yeah, I mean, I'm going to be gutted if London's dead. But to be honest, I don't think we've done enough as a country to support the game and to deserve it. Essentially, I think there are much more deserving countries on the continent, and maybe this is the sort of slap in the face we need. And we shouldn't be so self-entitled, I think, as a fair word, as a fan base, because we have the highest consumption of league pass subscriptions in Europe and the second highest NBA store usage, I'll call it. So there's obviously an appetite there.
Yeah, I wonder whether it's like, I mean, you and I have spoken about this before, where fans are sort of, over here, I don't know about you, but like I grew up, I was by far the biggest basketball fan in my school. There were others, and there are people who still reach out to me today who I was in school with and say, "Oh, how about them Golden State Warriors, eh?" And they because if Steph Curry does something fantastic or that goes viral, but there's certainly been I feel like I've sort of had to not hide. Not that I'm ashamed of my basketball fandom, but it's never a hot topic around the water cooler at work. It's more people are talking about something called football. And, I don't really know what to make of that sport. I don't know if it'll catch on, but it certainly seems to be gaining popularity much quicker than basketball does. So, I mean, we'll see. We'll see. Fingers crossed that there is some NBA presence, and I think, like, you've said it on Twitter, and I certainly said it as well. A big thank you to the NBA UK offices. They've, for the past few years, certainly since Double Clutch has been going, they've been very supportive of us as a website and a podcast, and I think a big thank you goes to them for helping us I guess grow as a website. Oh God, it's almost like I'm getting emotional now. But
are you accepting an award or something?
It's just don't play the music yet, and I've got some more people to thank. It'll be a shame, but we'll see what happens in the future. I don't think it's going to go away entirely.
No, fingers crossed. But for the meantime, it's au revoir, bon voyage, and or if you're French, merci beaucoup. Let's quickly move on to something else then. Last week on the pod with yourself and mighty Joe Hulbert, we jinxed a couple of teams. I think. I
kind of feel
DC
bad about
curse. So we spoke about Brogdon and McCollum last week and the impact their franchises. The impact on their respective franchises of their injuries. And both teams have gone through the ringer since then. We'll start with Nurkic, who suffered a compound fracture, for anyone querying what a compound means. Any injury in which a broken bone pierces the skin. So get your spewing emojis ready.
Yeah.
He had a career high in a double overtime 148-144 win over the Nets. In just 33 minutes, 51 seconds, he had 32, 16, 5 with 2 steals and 4 blocks. And it's his second full season with the Blazers. He's just 24.
Really?
I forget how young he is. He's a 24-year-old, averaging 15.6, 10.4, 3.2, which are all career highs. So obviously he's out indefinitely. He had successful surgery on Tuesday to put his leg back together. And I know you're on the same boat as me on this. I've not watched the clip. I've completely avoided it. I cannot stand things like that at all.
It's more that, wouldn't you just hate it to happen to you? That it is going to put him out for such a long time that I don't want to. It's I don't mind the gore of it. I'm pretty comfortable with that side of things. It's just I don't know. Not that I find it disrespectful, but a couple of people on Twitter have said I'm not going to be reposting this video because it's gruesome and it's horrible, and I think that's where I sort of stand on it. It's like, do I really need to see this, and do other people need to see this? Just I feel terrible for the guy. You ran through a couple of his stats there, but he is having season highs across the board. The thing that I'm most impressed with is going into some deeper numbers. He's having great plus minus, and more so on the defensive end. So when he's on the floor, his team is 3.5 points better, and that places him 9th in the NBA on defense in terms of defensive plus minus. So I remember him in Denver, and I remember when he moved over to the Trailblazers, and I thought, well, he's a bit like Enes Kanter, he's got that same sort of just offensive bit of a bully game, and he's probably more skilled than Enes, but I think that was my impression of him when he was leaving Denver. But actually he's a pretty solid defensive guy, or he certainly has become so in the past year and a half. And yeah, I feel so bad for him. But beyond that, I feel really bad for Damian Lillard as well. This guy, he hasn't had the career he deserves, I think. He's one of the best leaders we've probably ever seen in the NBA, and I just feel like every year there's something that stops him from going as far as he can take a team. This year it's obviously the injury. Last year it was coming up against a juggernaut in Anthony Davis and the Pelicans. The year before, I'm pretty sure Nurkic was injured the year before when he first came over.
Yeah, he got injured just after a decent run. Like he had he had a really sort of pumped arrival where he played out of his skin and then he got hurt. I think he broke a leg then as well, actually, but not a compound fracture.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I just feel like he's had the worst, some of the worst luck because, I mean, him and CJ play great together, and I hope they don't blow up the team because, and I hope they, in some ways, I hope they keep Terry Stotts as well because I think even though he's not the greatest coach in the league, I think I think he has actually shown improvement over the years. I don't know how you feel. You're a Trailblazers fan. You.
I think Stotts is a great coach. I think he has been hampered by Neil Olshey as the GM, giving out ridiculous contracts, which is where my conversations tend to go with the Blazers most of the time. Tobias Leonard, Mo Harkless, Evan Turner, et al. And you were right about his injury in 2017. It was a non-displaced right leg fibular fracture. So he's had a couple of leg injuries, which is
what leg is the
worrying.
compound one? The current.
Looking at the picture right now, left leg, because I can see a still of it.
Well, at least it's not the same one, because that could, if it shows signs on one particular leg, then that leg is obviously weakening over time and getting worse. So, hopefully he takes off next season and gets fully repaired and hopefully he comes back with both legs working just as well as each other and fingers crossed.
Do you know what I found that was really good is like not only the outpouring from fellow NBA players, a sort of a respect for him, but at the Bosnian national football team's game, the crowd were chanting for him as well. And it's like,
really?
Can you
that's
imagine?
Cool.
Yeah, that's amazing. So this is a guy from playing in a different part of the world. Can you imagine if a Brit did that? Can you imagine if when Deng was at his all-star peak level, had suffered a similar kind of injury? Do you think there would have been any sort of similar display of affection for him?
If we were at a football match, we could have tried to start it, but I think we would have got some confusing looks. Yeah,
or a beating, one of the two. I don't know, but let's move on from Nurkic and his injury. Actually, before we do, I just wonder, this type of freak injury. Do you think they're becoming more frequent? Because I sat there and I went through in my head, and I know I've missed someone. But in the last 3 or 4 years, we had Kevin Ware in college, Paul George, Jeremy Lin, Gordon Hayward, all suffering weird freak injuries where parts of their bodies end up bending ways they shouldn't, and in places they shouldn't. I mean, I think
they. I mean, my history of the injuries of the NBA isn't incredibly strong, but I reckon there were probably other injuries, but that were pretty terrible. But that being said, I think the game it is today. If you think back to 90s basketball, everybody has this image of 90s basketball where nobody steps beyond the 3-point line. All 10 players are cramped inside the arc, and basically it's just banging against bodies. So it's all upper body stuff, and there's very few people flying high enough to actually have these freak accidents like Gordon Hayward did a few years ago, or like Paul George did a few years ago, where they were both above the rim, they landed awkwardly. I think players are so much more athletic now that they can do things that puts their bodies at greater risk. Whereas when people were back playing in Converse Chuck Taylors and they would have different types of injuries because they didn't have the equipment to look after their bodies. Whereas I think in recent years, I reckon bodies, they still degrade, but I mean, we have so much better like rest patterns and things like that perhaps you don't see the same amount and same number of niggling injuries that keeps players rest and whatnot. Yeah. But I think
so what you're saying essentially is that the evolution of sports science and almost like fitness regimes could have, whilst removing the niggling, smaller, less serious repetitive injuries, means that at some point, because of the additional load you're taking, could cause a more significant injury.
I guess so, and just the speed and the height that these players jump and run to. The amount of times I've seen Russell Westbrook run the full length of the floor, and I just think, oh God, how is that? How is the force that he's using to dunk a basketball not breaking his wrist?
Well, I was going to say, if you're going to say his knees, it definitely has. It's broken his knees before.
Well, I mean, but that again, that it's the frequency. I think there's possibly fewer niggling injuries, but the bigger injuries, they are few and far between. But I think they are more noticeable. I don't know. That's just a general feel. It's not. Obviously, I don't have the science or the data to back that up, but yeah.
Okay, so let's move on then to some more niggling injuries. Then we obviously spoke about Malcolm Brogdon out with a heel injury, a plantar fascia tear in his right foot. He's out for a while. But on the Bucks as well, we've also now got Nikola Mirotic, who he's fractured his left thumb and expected to miss 2 to 4 weeks. Your friend Pau Gasol is expected to miss approximately 1 month with a left ankle injury. And rookie Dante DiVincenzo is out for the rest of the season with bilateral heel bursitis. There's no worse time of year to get hit by injuries like this than now, when you're 6 or 7 games away from the playoffs starting, and trying to hit your sort of your next level. You're sort of gearing up. You want to be sort of fresh and ready for the playoffs, but also sort of at that point where you're just ready to go. And
well, I mean, that's why you see so many people buying into the whole rest thing these days, isn't it? So many coaches leaning into it a bit more, because at this time of year, injuries do pile up. And actually, I don't think I'm going to be contradicting what I was just talking about, but I would say about 3 or 4 years ago, do you remember when we were having those seasons where we sort of had back-to-back-to-back games, and it felt like every team that had a high usage player, that high usage player would go down in a major way towards the end of the season. I think that's lessened actually in recent years. And yeah, we do still have the dramatic injuries, but I would be interested to see players, some data around players that are sort of averaging more than, say, 25 minutes, and the number of injuries at the tail end of the season. That would be really interesting data to try and dive into. If I was a better podcaster, I probably would have prepared something like that before I got on. But
well, I don't have something quite like that. But in terms of, we're talking like the Bucks, they're actually really good at managing minutes. Their highest logged minutes is 32.9. That's Giannis. That's not a lot at all for your star player. It's kind of bizarre actually that they've managed to keep him that far down, considering someone like Bradley Beal, even he's at 37.6 and leads the league in minutes per game. Fair enough, an extra 5 minutes might not seem like a lot, but across an 82 game season, that's a heck of a lot of extra minutes. How much do you think these injuries are going to affect the Bucks going into the offseason? Obviously they had a win on Tuesday night that we'll get into in a minute, but from my perspective, Gasol and DiVincenzo, they would have had reduced roles in the playoffs anyway, as we start to see rotations get shortened. Mirotic and Brogdon, we said last week, it was a significant loss, but Mirotic as well, although he's not been what they probably wanted him to be just yet, he's a spark plug on both ends of the floor. How do you see these impacts affecting the overall success of Milwaukee's postseason challenge?
I think they're quite a deep team. You listed off a couple of names there, but you've still got Chris Middleton, you've still got Eric Bledsoe, you've still got a lot of the other guys who are, like you said, are going to be in the top 8 or top 7 if you need to shorten the rotation that much, going deep into the playoffs. I think you certainly don't want to lose bodies going into the playoffs. Like you said, you want to be hitting your stride and you want to make sure that everybody's firing on all cylinders. But I think, I don't know. I think the only thing that can beat the Bucks are, is perhaps a little bit of inexperience, but also the teams coming up behind them. Like I don't think this season, if they don't win a championship or don't make it to the finals, I don't think necessarily, and touch wood, unless we, increase the curse and actually, get more players bumped off the list, then yeah, I think they're going to be okay. That being said, I think, there's a couple of teams that, like the Raptors, I think actually, I don't hear enough people talking about them, but I think they're a giant threat.
It's the anti-Canada conspiracy. It's every year. No one talks enough about the Raptors. I'm sort of saying that tongue in cheek, but I think there is actually like some truth to it. Like the Raptors and the single Canadian team never seem to get enough love. Yeah. Even last year, as they won the regular season conference, obviously they didn't win the conference in the playoffs, which is a really poorly way of wording that. So obviously they finished first in the East, we'll say. They didn't win the conference, and then they obviously got bumped by the Cavs. They don't even get Christmas Day games, and I think they've been phenomenal this year.
They really
and the way they've done it without for a significant period of time, Kawhi Leonard, who, whatever issues he's still dealing with, he's not available every single game. He's only going to play 70% of the games this season, and yet in his absence, they are just as good. They're not missing a beat.
Yeah. So I mean, I was looking it up earlier. So with Kawhi, they've gone 37-18, right? Which is that means you're winning 67% of your games, just over a third of your games. Without Kawhi, they've played. I think I've got these stats right. They've gone 15-5 without him, which means that they're winning 75% of their games. Now that is terrifying. If you're going into the Eastern Conference Finals and you are facing a fully healthy, because let's be honest, he is fully healthy, a fully healthy Kawhi. You've got Danny Green, you've got a couple of other, Pascal Siakam. These are all long-rangey people to go up against Giannis and Chris Middleton, and even marking Brook Lopez outside. That's actually, I want to see it, because the first game of the season between the Bucks and the Raptors, neither Giannis or Kawhi played. And I think so outside of that game, the Bucks won that game, but outside of that, the Bucks have won 2-1. So, Kawhi versus Giannis, both of them are playing. The Bucks are winning 2-1. But I just think in a 7-game series, it's going to be, especially with the experience on the Spurs team. You got, I just mentioned, Kawhi's won a Finals MVP. Danny Green's been to his fair few finals. Even Kyle Lowry. I know he's never really performed in the playoffs, but my God, he's been there for a good number of years now. He knows what it takes to. He knows what to expect. Yep.
Marc Gasol, Serge Ibaka.
Yeah, these are all
so many big. They're not necessarily at the peak of their career anymore, but guys who have performed on big stages.
Yeah, they're going to be scary. And I think, there's a lot of, the interesting stories are in Boston. Philly has been interesting all season. You've got Indiana. That's kind of a cool story. The fact that they're still, I think as we speak, they're still holding down a top 4 seed. And then you've got a really interesting race at the bottom of the Eastern Conference. Who's going to get in? It's between 4 different teams, I think. So, everybody's just ignoring the Raptors, but ignore them at your peril. They're going to be dangerous. Yeah,
absolutely. So we're sort of talking about the Bucks there. On Tuesday, they beat the Rockets 108-94. It was sort of pitted as the battle of the MVPs. We'll call it MVP-mageddon or something.
That was terrible.
It was terrible, wasn't it? But it really didn't turn out to be that. And I can't believe this is, these are still quality performances that were put out. But the Bucks held Harden to 23 points, 10 assists, and 7 rebounds. That's almost a triple-double. But they held him to 34.6% from the field, 9 of 26 shooting, 1 of 9 from 3, which is 11.1%. And it's just, he played 37 minutes 55 seconds. In 32 minutes 41, Giannis puts up 19, 14 and 4. It's just, these aren't the numbers they've been putting up all season, but they are both big games. They just didn't feel like superstar games to me.
Yeah, but I think I think this comes down to the coaching, honestly. I don't think, my personal opinion is that Giannis doesn't actually need to play at an MVP level to be the MVP. However you want to sort of, everybody has their own spec. There's no set of guidelines for voting for MVP. My personal guidelines is you either need to be a top 2 team in your conference. You need to be the leader of that team. Whether that means, it doesn't necessarily have to mean points, but I think you should be a big contributor in that area. I think you should be decent on both ends of the floor, is my personal opinion. But in previous seasons, some people who have just been useful on one end of the floor, they might be crap on defense. Russell Westbrook, but they might have won it, and that's fine. He deserved it, but at the same time, I think, and I don't want to take anything away from James Harden. He has actually been an improvement on defense this year, but the team planned for James Harden perfectly. So I'm gonna get a bit nerdy now, and talk a bit about Houston offense, right? They tend to, when James Harden has the ball, he actually doesn't enjoy playing in a pick and roll all that much, and he's actually, he's so talented that he doesn't really need it. Sometimes they throw one out, sometimes they put Capella up there, but he can actually go 1-on-1, and that's how the Bucks played him. What they did is they sat on his left-hand side, which is his shooting arm. So basically, it was incredibly difficult to get a 3-point shot off. And they actually let him drive quite, unchallenged into the mid-range area. They sacked off whoever was not guarding Clint Capella on the baseline, because there's normally 4 players on the baseline, because that's how Houston likes to play. They sort of doubled Clint Capella off the ball, so whoever was sort of closest to the basket, they could put a body in front of James Harden, and it made the pass incredibly difficult to get off to Clint Capella, and it meant the original defender, usually Eric Bledsoe on Tuesday, could sort of, trail behind James Harden, and he actually got 2 blocked shots on him during the game.
Big blocks,
and I think they prepared for him perfectly, and I think that's when brilliant coaching, like we've spoken about it last week, but he's Mike Budenholzer, he's probably going to get Coach of the Year in my opinion. I think they just prepared for him, and that's my concern going into the playoffs, is every year a good coach prepares for James Harden, and that's when he starts to fall apart a little bit, which is why I think my personal MVP between the two is probably Giannis Antetokounmpo.
Interesting. So yeah, I think the basic principle that they went with was you're exactly right. You force Harden off the 3-point line, where he is the most prolific 3-point shooter in the league this year. You give up the mid-range. It was interesting. One of the stats I picked up, which was really quite interesting, was that for the season, James Harden has taken 68 shots in the paint that were not at the rim. So that's less than 1 a game, because we're in the late 70s now. Against the Bucks, he took 7. So they've completely opened up that short game, but away from the rim. You're right. There was the help that was coming from Capella's man. Usually Brook Lopez would sag off. Quite often they let Harden go back to his left hand, and he forced these weird little floaters, which didn't fall for whatever reason. But you're right. That secondary help coming from the weak side baseline, it just made things just insanely difficult for Capella. It was great to see that, because normally if they get loose, Capella is just going for 18 to 20 on lobs, basically. And they just completely shut him down, and you essentially made Capella become a distributor. And I thought it was just it was just incredibly well played. And it all starts from the basic concepts that you probably teach the kids you coach. That is, if you're the defensive player, force the offensive player to his weaker hand.
Yeah.
And it just took him out of his comfort zone. They obviously tried it earlier in the season when they faced off, and it kind of sets the blueprint for how other teams should coach him. And you're right, it's something that they're going to try and highlight in the playoffs when you sort of have to strategize and plan for specific issues. He didn't make any adjustments. It didn't seem like he was going to in that game. And I'm just trying to have a look now, like, because although they tried it earlier in the season, it didn't quite work as well the first time round because he ended up with 42.
Yeah. I mean,
but
James Harden still did get plenty of shots, and some of them just didn't go down.
Did.
And a lot of those, like you said, mid-range sort of, but slightly in the paint, slightly outside the paint, sort of unusual shots that he doesn't normally take. I imagine he could probably, on some nights he could probably hit a lot more of those. He's still going to get points. And I remember I was watching the post-game interview with Eric Bledsoe, and he said, well, he's always going to score. The only thing you can do is take away what he wants to do and make him score in other ways. And how many points a game does Harden get off 3-pointers? That is what his entire offense is built around. Now, if you can limit that, then and just get him scoring 2 points every time he's down the floor, then you're probably gonna cut at least 10 points off his scoring average. It just seems like it's an offense that can be figured out, and that's my concern. Now, don't get me wrong, D'Antoni is an offensive genius. I'm sure come playoff time, he's probably got a couple of things pocketed himself. He'll be able to adjust as well. But I think we've seen for a couple of years now that the Rockets, they fall short, and it's because they don't have, the versatility to be able to adjust their mindset going into these big games.
Yeah, I agree. One of the other key things for me was how cleanly they played Harden on defense.
Yeah.
I only remember one silly foul, and it was George Hill's sort of was on his left side playing him high, and Harden stepped sideways and pulled up for three, and Hill just randomly jumped into him, and I was just like, what? Hold on, what?
Well, I think that particular player, I remember that one. One of the things that James Harden is renowned for is the step back. But I think I was intrigued by the way that they were playing him. George Hill didn't play him as well as Eric Bledsoe played Harden.
Yeah, agree.
But he was still on that left side, and I think Harden was getting frustrated that he actually couldn't get a shot off because he couldn't get that step back because the player was on their left-hand side the entire time. So he actually took a side step instead of a step back. And I think that possibly threw George Hill off, that he wasn't really expecting him to be going that way. And then the shot was up, and that's what, I don't know. It might have just been George Hill trying to foul him and James Harden trying to get frustrated and draw the foul. But regardless, I think, I think he did, the Bucks did a solid job of defending him. And, I think Harden and D'Antoni did a less good job at trying to adjust to that.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned that Giannis is your choice. I wouldn't be upset if Harden was the MVP.
No, definitely not.
He's an incredible talent. If you look at what he's done this season, he's averaging 35 points a game over, which is just ridiculous. But in terms of, and I'm writing a piece on this at the minute actually, about whether that's a product of circumstance or whether he's the creator of the circumstance, because obviously he's the perfect fit for D'Antoni's system. But I wonder if that because it's geared through him so much to the point where his usage rate this season is the second highest usage rate in NBA history back to when they started recording it in 1977. The only one higher was Russell Westbrook's MVP season 2 years ago. There's a downside to Harden ball, which is what I'm going to call it for the time being, in that if he has an off game, they struggle to fill the void. And I think that's because those players are not used to having to carry a load. Like, it's all great when it's working well, because, you know, it's easy to make shots when everything's going your way. But who can step up in his absence? Because Chris Paul is becoming less and less the Chris Paul that we've all, you know, grown to either love or hate, depending on how you feel about him, but appreciate nonetheless over the years. Clint Capella is still a guy who, despite his size and athleticism and improvements, is still only the player he is because of Harden and his ability to just catch lobs. The rest of the guys, like Eric Gordon, are infrequent. Tucker, I think, is great and did a great job on Giannis, and we'll probably get to that in a minute. But the rest of the guys, there's just not enough there from them. If and their bench scoring is the worst in the league, like by far. That disappoints me. And then this next stat, and I realise this is skewed, but if you took Harden's points off the Rockets, and in fact, if you could reduce them down, because obviously he's leading the league in points, it's gonna have a massive impact. But they would drop way down that list if you went with someone with who's still a decent scorer but not leading the league in scoring. I just kind of feel that I get that he is the best player on the floor, and quite often at times having the best player on the floor will mean that you win a series. But at the same time, this is a team game. There are 10 bodies on the floor at a time, and if your other 4 players can't step up, you are making the defense's job that much easier. You're as great as Bud's schemes were. If the Rockets had been able to shoot from outside, I can't believe how many air balls I saw yesterday. If the Rockets had been able to shoot from outside, they'd have stretched that defense and opened up those opportunities.
It's going back to there was a good article written by Archie Corbett on Double Clutch a few weeks ago. It was about the pace Spurs, and it was essentially about how Indiana's mid-range game is sort of, it's keeping them afloat, but ultimately what it gave a nod to was the fact that they have a system, and it was the same. It's the same as the Spurs. They have a system, and what having a system means is that anyone can fit into it. Now, when you have superstar players to add into that system, for example, like a Tim Duncan, or even going back even further, if you've got a triangle offensive system that the Lakers used to run and the Bulls used to run, and you have a superstar, it can take that system and elevate it. If you build a system around a single player, that means that when that player is removed, so is the offense. And I think, as good as D'Antoni is, he introduced the world to 7 seconds or less, which made superstars out of so many players on the Phoenix Suns that probably didn't deserve to score as many points or receive as many contracts as they did. But he is an offensive genius, but at the same time, it was the system that helped some of those perhaps subpar offensive players and subpar teammates, contribute to big wins deep into the playoffs year after year. But if you have an offensive player who is the system, that's not going to win you championships, in my opinion. I don't think it ever has in the history of the league.
No, I struggle to think of one where it's taken, one player alone. I mean, one player can get you over the line.
Maybe Dirk Nowitzki in 2011, maybe. But even then,
the team that had Sean Marion and Jason Kidd on it.
Exactly. That was.
And Tyson Chandler.
Yeah, so even looking back now, clearly, it was more of a team effort than you think. I know he gets the main rewards for that championship, and quite rightly so. He was the best player, just as Tim Duncan did, just as Michael Jordan did, just as LeBron did when he was winning championships all those years ago. But at the same time, it was built on a team concept, and I think most championship teams are.
Yeah, I mean, what the Rockets have done, considering they started the year 11 and 14, to be in the 4th seed, 4 games back on the top seed, is amazing. Like if you discount those 25 first games, their winning percentage is 72%. So that's easily the 1 seed.
And the majority of that was Harden, which is why I wouldn't be mad if he wins the MVP. But I ran through my list earlier of what I want to see. If the Houston Rockets can get into that 2nd seed, I would have no problem with it. If they stick in the 3rd seed or they're battling for a slightly lower seed, I mean, they only need to lose 1 or 2 games and they slip back in the same way that the Oklahoma City Thunder have slipped back.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're going to just tumble down the Western Conference because it's so tight. But, you know, if they can break into that 2nd seed, then I would have no problem with him receiving, you know, an MVP trophy.
Yeah. So just for the record, I'm Team Giannis. I've said it publicly.
Yeah.
I think I've had a Twitter debate about it as well in recent months that I may or may not have saved just in case I need to bring it back when they announce things.
God, I hope that wasn't with me. I don't think it was.
No, it wasn't. It's all right. There was even a poll involved as well. So there's lots of members of the Double Clutch community out there who have voted on it as well. So just know that I am watching you silently, waiting for my moment. But of course, it may not happen, and if it does, I'll make sure that we re-edit and overdub this section. So let's segue then from the MVP talk, and we can do it nicely by linking 2 players who may or may not have been involved in relationships with the same family. So we're going to move over to a guy who's out the league now. An article that you shared with us this morning, actually, on the Double Clutch Slack, in the Players Tribune, about a 13-year vet, Kris Humphries, who's most famous for his off-court exploits, as he self-proclaims in his article. And I found it a really interesting article, and it was a great share, actually, in terms of just how people have to reassess their goals if they want to stay in the league for a long time.
Yeah.
I didn't know anything about Kris Humphries, and for those of you who, you know, for whatever reason don't know anything, or even if you don't care, just go and read this because it will change your mind. Like, this guy was an elite junior swimmer, like beat Phelps. He was that good, and then became one of only 1.2% of NCAA players make it to the NBA, and he's one who not only did that, but became a 13-year NBA vet off the back of it. So I know you wanted to discuss this in particular. What was it about it that sort of stuck out to you?
It was just a really, like, you know, you only ever see, especially on these Players Tribune things, you always see the ones with Steph, or you see, you see LeBron writing about his move back to Cleveland, or you see Kobe and his ode to basketball when he retired, and I just thought it's really beautiful to be able to see the game from a different point of view. Like you said, he played a good number of years in the NBA. I mean, he never really sort of astounded anyone with any fantastic stats. I mean, I'm just having a quick flick through now, but his highest scoring season was 13 points per game. You know, that's not going to blow anyone away. But what he did was realize the importance of just doing the boring, the difficult things that you don't really get credit for. After I think what he described as, you know, a bit of a disappointing start. He thought he was going to be this great player, and, you know, he sort of and from the sound of it, from his memory, he seemed like a bit of a dick at times, you know, because
I mean that is what he describes himself as.
Yeah, because he wanted to be good. He wanted to be the player that everybody was talking about, and it ended up being that players and the league and everybody spoke about him because he ended up going out with, or being married to one of the Kardashians. I don't even know which one, so please don't ask me which one. But it doesn't really matter, does it? But he ended up being a lot in headlines, and then of course they ended up getting divorced, and then I think if it's the same one, you know, that they ended up going out with another NBA player, and I don't know, it was because of how popular his wife or ex-wife was. He ended up getting booed across the entire league, and yeah, he, like I said, he only ever averaged more than 10 points twice in his career. He was, you know, you don't normally have that level of hate and level of sort of recognition of who you are, especially if it's not your day job. You know, all these players, they all get lots of love and or hate or attention, at least, because they are the stars of the league. You know, but when it's someone who is, you know, I mean, who would be the equivalent today? You know, an 8-9 point scorer, you know, someone who generally keeps his head down, but you know, in terms of out of the public eye. But I'm not really sure who that player would be. Maybe Davis Bertans, and you know, he just goes out, he plays, but people on his team know him, the fans of that team know him, but you know, nobody really knows who Davis Bertans is. So you know, why should anyone care? It's like Davis Bertans being hated around the league, but who knows that guy? And yet this Kris Humphries, the article, you know, it's well written. He seems like a genuinely lovely guy these days, and I just thought it was a really nice. I'd recommend heading over to it. Maybe we can tweet it out of the DC Twitter account from after the show, and yeah, hopefully people can pick up on it, because it was really, really fascinating read.
Yeah, absolutely. I just find, you know, having had such success as an elite swimmer, then to transition and become an elite
I had no idea.
athlete in another sport. And, you know, he talks about doing, 500 push-ups and 1,000 sit-ups a day as a teenager whilst watching
I
the
need
NBA
to
on
do
TV.
my quota today, actually. I haven't done this yet.
I might have managed that in a decade. And, like, and this is one of the things I was saying before, is that to get to the NBA, you need to be really, really, really good. You need to have dominated, to a degree, the sport at a high level. And so in order to get to that point, you need to have a pretty strong mentality and sort of an idea of who you are and what you're going to be, and a drive and a confidence. But I find it really interesting that he then quickly realised that he wasn't going to be this star, this scorer, or even a starter as he expected he would be. And it's like a lot of guys can't make that adjustment.
Yeah.
And fall out of the league. Like I remember Ricky Davies, when LeBron was drafted to Cleveland, there's a great Ricky Davies quote, who was just like a gunner, and just an out-and-out scorer, and that was about it. And he was like, I honestly thought they were bringing LeBron here to pass me the ball. And it's a genuine statement. And it's like, he didn't last as long as he probably should have in the league. And
like Adam Morrison and players like that. You know, Adam Morrison was one of the best college players of all time. You know, and I think he was drafted number 1 overall. And yet he couldn't assimilate to the NBA game, because he wasn't given the ball every time. He wasn't relied upon. He had to fit into, I can't remember who he was drafted by, the Bobcats, was it?
Yeah.
And
third pick.
Yeah,
in 2006.
And you know, it's the NBA is littered with players like that. And I remember speaking to John Amici a few months ago at NBA London, actually, and well, it wasn't directly to me, to be fair. It was part of a junior NBA camp, and he was saying that even in the UK, he wasn't like the 3rd or 4th most talented player on his team in the UK. But what he did was work on the boring aspects of the game. You know, he set screens better than anybody else. He grabbed rebounds better than anybody else, and you know, he knew how to pass out of the post. And I think sometimes those players who just, you know, are born to be role players, they don't get enough credit. And especially when you go from being a star to a role player, I think that's even tougher. So so hats off to Kris Humphries. Yeah, well done. He had a solid career, and yeah, you know, hopefully he enjoys the rest of his life, whatever he's doing with it.
Yeah. Just one point on Adam Morrison. And I think Kris makes this point as well, you know, about fitting in the locker room. One of the stories I love about Adam Morrison is that he refused to take showers.
Yeah,
and so he used to just to stink.
Maybe that's why he didn't get many more contracts after that.
Yeah, but I'm surprised that the defense would get close enough to him, to be fair. But anyway, so we'll tweet that out so people can people can check that out. So let's move on to games of the week. Huw, what's your game of the week?
Well, I think if you look ahead to Friday, mind you, some people might be listening to this a little bit later and might have already passed, but on Friday night there's a really good game between the Nuggets and the Thunder. Now it's in Oklahoma, and I think the Thunder need this win, to be honest. They've been struggling a bit recently, so they need to build some momentum. What better way to do that at home with a big win over, a team that might be the first or second seed in the conference? But at the same time, the Nuggets, I think, they really want that top seed because they've never really been in the playoffs before. They don't really know what it's going to be like. They need home court advantage throughout the playoffs if they stand any chance of going deep, in my personal opinion. They're young, they need that home court familiarity, so they're going to be gunning for that number one spot and they won't want to lose this game. I think that's going to be an exciting one. So yeah, I'd make sure everybody tunes into that. I think it's at midnight, if I remember correctly. Okay,
cool. My suggestion is the Charlotte Hornets at the Golden State Warriors at 1:30 a.m. on Sunday. The Warriors, you mentioned, the Nuggets just there, they're sort of battling with the Warriors for that number one spot. So it could have a repercussion there. In terms of the Hornets, they are fighting tooth and nail to keep their season alive. They've won 4 straight at the time of recording, including the game against Toronto. Jeremy Lamb's half-court heat. Did you see that?
That was crazy.
That was insane. And then Kemba, did he drop 38 on your Spurs last night?
How about we stop talking now?
Oh, right, okay. So, their season may well be over by Sunday.
Yeah.
But you can guarantee if it's not, that is going to be a game to watch.
And they're both of those games, they're on Sky Sports, I believe, aren't they? So if you're
no, I don't think this Hornets one is, actually.
Oh, is it not? Fair enough. Well, certainly the Friday one is. So if you're a Sky Sports subscriber, I'm pretty sure you'll be able to watch that.
So anything else you want to cover at all, Huw?
No, there's going to be a couple of articles going up in the next few days. There's going to be one on the 76ers and just how their process is going. But yeah, keep your eye out. And also, I know I don't think we spoke about this last time, but at this time of year, sometimes you get a bit lethargic. You just want the playoffs to start. There was a pretty good roundtable article that we put together on Double Clutch, where you can, where you can sort of, find out the top 5 most burning questions in the NBA. Oh, and a bit of personal stuff as well. Manu Ginobili had his jersey retired, or he's having it retired tonight. I looked back on his career from a sort of FIBA perspective and how he might be in the past 20 years the most important international basketball player. And yeah, so you can read that. I'll tweet that. Check out my Twitter account for that, and hopefully, yeah, and check out Mike's Twitter account as well. You want to reel them off?
Yeah, so Huw can be found at coach_Huw. I can be found at Mike Miller_time. If you're not already following the site on all social media platforms, you need to get on there and click follow for at Double Clutch UK. Do it across all the social media platforms. That sounds really random, isn't it? All the social media.
It sounds Facebook, like my granddad Twitter. Trying to tell me about
yeah, I know. Brilliant. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, we're all over that. If you've got any questions or want to get in touch, email us admin@doubleclutch.uk. And whatever you're listening to this podcast on right now, and I'm talking service versus what device, whether it's Spotify, iTunes, whatever it is, go and review us, please.
Oh, give us 5 stars. That'd be good, wouldn't it?
Yeah, give us 5 stars, and leave us some nice comments to read through. It makes our day.
Yeah.
But thank you very, very much for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode. See you soon.
Peace out.